In the sutra, at the first question, in the sutra on the 8 realizations of great beings spoken by the Buddha, it is written that we vow to bear the burden of countless sufferings on behalf of all sentient beings. How do we do this? The question is, the sutra says, we are willing to bear the burdens of others. Others have sufferings. We're willing to bear their sufferings. Would anybody be so compassionate as to bear others' sufferings? Sufferings are painful. How would anybody be willing to bear the sufferings of others? It's inconceivable. How? How do we do this? To answer these questions, we really have to know the nature of sufferings and compassion. What is compassion? And to trace further, what is life? Does life have a purpose? Is there any meaning in life at all? Does life have an objective? It seems that everybody is being driven into living a life. Now, I'm not answering the question now. I'm just trying to move around the questions and bring out all these problems, to bring out all these other questions related to this question. And then I attempt to answer the questions. One question triggers another question. It's not just one single question. It's a question that triggers many others. It triggers one to think. It triggers one to be creatively thinking, why are we here? Does life have a meaning at all? And somebody say, I'm being driven into living a life. I was born, I have no option. I was born into this world. Do I have an option not being born into this world? Do I have an option of refusing to be born in this world? Somebody say, no, you don't have an option. When you're born, you're born. But I say you have an option. I say you have an option not to be born into this life. That option was open to you before this life. You didn't exercise it. You still want to go through, you still carry the karma, you perform the karma that drives you into what you are today. You had that option before. I have that option before. So, this question triggers many others. What is life? How do we bear the sufferings of others? We have to understand life. I remember there was a philosopher in the last century, and his name was, I think his name was Viktor Frankl, something like that. I forgot his name. And he was teaching philosophy at Harvard, at Stanford, and many other universities in America. He was touring around the world to give lectures in different universities. And he wrote books, and he was just a philosopher. No religion is involved. It's just a philosopher. And a question was put forward to him. Students said, Professor, if you have to summarize what is life, can you summarize in a sentence for everybody? So you've been talking about life and so much philosophy. Philosophy of Nietzsche, of Sigmund Freud, philosophy of Plato, of Aristotle, of Socrates. We're all confused. Is there any one sentence that you think would summarize the objective of life? Just one sentence. And the professor said, well, how can we do something like this? At that time, it was a class of 30 to 40 people. I hand out a paper to every one of you, and you write out what you think life is. And what is the meaning of life, what is the objective of life. And if anybody who hits the jackpot of what I'm going to say, I'm going to point it out. So he was distributing all papers out, and everybody's write his question, write that on a piece of paper, and all the papers were collected later. And he took the time to flip through them open and see which one coincides with his thinking. Ah, he got one. This is what I mean by life. And he read it out. He read it out to all the others. What did it say in the paper? It said, life is potentially meaningful under any conditions. And life is to make other people realize the meaning of life. In other words, the meaning of life is not to let all the others know the meaning of life. Now, we really have to ponder on this. To let others to know the meaning of life. We know that life has suffering, and there's no objection to that comment, because everywhere there's suffering. Everybody is go through suffering. We have suffering. We have the basic 8 sufferings that you should know. If you don't even know that you are suffering, if you think that I'm happy, I'm looking for happiness, and I'm not happy today, I want to be happy. I'm not happy, I'm depressed. That's why I'll go for meditation. Some people treat meditation as a cure for depression, as a cure to find something happy. Oh yeah, you can find it. But is that the objective of meditation? We have sufferings, we all know. No objection. What are these sufferings? For first-time comers, we really have to know of these 8 sufferings. Life is suffering. 8 suffering. What are these 8 sufferings? Birth is suffering. Death is suffering. Aging is suffering. Sickness is suffering. These are the 4 basic sufferings. And what are the other 4s? Departure from beloved ones. Your beloved one passed away. Your mom, your dad, your granddad, your husband, your wife, your son, your daughter passed away. You are grief-stricken. You're depressed because you thought it's been not fair to you. Now, departure from beloved ones is suffering. Cohabitation with hated ones is suffering. You hate your partners, but you have to live with him. Your husband, your wife, your whatnot. You have to endure their hatred. You don't like that guy, or that guy betrayed you, or that guy wants to ask for a divorce, or that guy has forsaken you, and you don't know why. You're grief-stricken. You thought you were just deserted for no reason. And what are other sufferings? So departure from beloved ones, cohabitation with hated ones, and a suffering arising from the 5 skandhas. If that's a summary of all the other sufferings. You have to know what the 5 skandhas are. The 5 skandhas, body and mind put together 5 aggregates. So we know that we have sufferings, and if you're compassionate, if you learn to be a bodhisattva, you know that you can turn suffering into human achievement and accomplishment. You can derive from guilt the opportunity to change oneself for the better. Derive from life's transitoriness an incentive to take responsibility for one's life. What do I mean by that? In the process of understanding suffering, even though realizing suffering, you transcend suffering. In other words, suffering will not stop the meaning of life. Suffering, the fact that you're suffering now, it pushes you to understand it, to realize it, to undergo it, and to achieve the higher standard, and to help others to know the suffering. Because anyway, we cannot avoid the suffering. We accept the suffering and attempt to change them, attempt to change our life. And not just your life and others' life. You see, suffering is enlightenment. Suffering is enlightenment. It's just like life and death is enlightenment. Some people say, I don't want this suffering, I want to go to that enlightenment. Suffering itself leads you to enlightenment. It is because of the realization of suffering 2,600 years ago that the Buddha left his palace in pursuit of enlightened spirituality. Because he knows that we are suffering. We want to transcend suffering. We just don't just realize and accept it. We accept it, but other than just apart from accepting it, we also want to transcend it. We go beyond suffering. So, to achieve the objective of life, the meaning of life, one must transcend subjective pleasure by doing something that is directed to something or some others other than oneself, by giving himself to a cause, to serve and to love. And this to love does not mean the sensuous love, it's compassion. So by giving yourself to a cause to serve and to love, you transcend suffering. You don't just sit there and physically endure suffering, or you think about the guilt, or you think about how come you suffer, the inequality, the grudges in you. You don't think about that. You transcend that. If you've been suffer, for example, if you suffer in a divorce, if you suffer in the sickness, you don't want to just immerse yourself in the sorrowfulness of the divorce, in the painfulness of the sickness. You want to transcend it. That's the reason why some cancer survivors, for those who have strong will to survive cancer, for those who, I'm prepared to die, nothing to strive for, that's it for me, there's no hope in me. The survivors, they never give up. They transcend suffering, because suffering leads you to enlightenment. You don't accept it. You fight against it. You transcend it. You also help others to transcend it. One cannot achieve transcendence of suffering if one does not help others to transcend suffering. In the process of helping others, you're helping yourself. Because you have to have the self-transcendence first. How do you self-transcend yourself? The Diamond Sutra says it. You have to transcend your ego, your I. You always say, this is me, this is I, this is my interest. I am unhappy. How come I am unhappy? Because I am unhappy because you let this I be unhappy. If you say, this I can transcend the unhappiness, then you're on your way. So how do we bear the suffering of others? You bear the suffering of others by helping others to transcend sufferings. That's how you can do it. And if you are compassionate enough, your suffering, others' suffering, is not apart from your suffering. Others' suffering is your suffering. In other words, I gave an example 2 weeks ago or 1 week ago. I said, how can anyone be happy if you're living in a great big mansion, a beautiful mansion, a gorgeous house, $1 billion house, and you walk out to the door and everybody is poor? Would you be happy? You won't be happy unless everybody is happy. You walk out the door, everybody is happy. But you walk out the door, everybody is in poverty. And you are the only guy in that ego mansion, gorgeousness mansion, that you are only enjoying yourself. You will never be happy. Once you walk out, you'll never be happy. Only when everybody is happy would you become happy. Because you and all the sentient beings are one and the same. We're not apart from each other. We're all the same. So, we vow to bear the burden of countless sufferings on behalf of all sentient beings, because you are one with them. All this, every wave is not apart from the ocean. and the ocean is not apart from the wave. If you recognize the wave as the wave, you're not in enlightenment. If you recognize each wave as the ocean and one and the same, then you are a bodhisattva, because others' suffering is your suffering. And Vimalakriti, there was a sutra entitled Vimalakriti Sutra, and in the sutra, Vimalakriti was sick, and the Buddha sent bodhisattvas to his home to pay homage to him and to give comfort also to the layman. Vimalakriti was a layman. He was not a monk, he was a layman. But he was the saint. He was a layman who was already enlightened. Well, we all said that at the times of the Buddha, there were actually two Buddhas. One is Buddha Sakyamuni, and the other was Buddha Vimalakriti. One showed himself as a monk, in appearance of a monk, and the other showed himself in appearance of a layman. A layman who was enlightened, who was already a Buddha. So, we should never underestimate the layman. The ordained Sangha should never underestimate the layman, because there was a layman Buddha, Vimalakriti. Now, Vimalakriti was sick or appeared as sick. And then all these bodhisattvas went to his home, his house. And then one of the bodhisattvas asked, "Are you sick?" Vimalakriti. And Vimalakriti said, "I am sick because sentient beings are sick. I'm well when sentient beings are well." So he's one with the sentient beings. So we bear the countless sufferings of all sentient beings because we and sentient beings are the same. We want to transcend suffering. Before transcending suffering, you have to transcend yourself. So you have to help others. Now that answers the first questions. I've been spending 15 minutes to answer that. Relates to the meaning of life, and the meaning of our life is to help others find the meaning of others. The importance of helping people to reach new heights of personal meaning through self-transcendence, through the application of efforts, techniques, acceptance of limitations, and wise decisions, will help others. Next question. Some religions do not allow the dead to be cremated. The thinking is spirits get burned up. Does it matter once the death has occurred if the body is cremated or buried? Let's put some logic into this thinking. If the spirit of a dead body can be burned up, then that spirit is something that can be burned up. That spirit must be in a form, must be particles, must be matter, must be molecules and atoms and protons and electrons, right? Otherwise, how can if something can be burned up, that thing is still a thing. If that thing is still a thing, that thing is subject to disintegration. If that thing is still a thing, it is not called eternity. Because how can eternity be burned up? If that thing can be burned up, its strength is limited. If that thing can be burned up, that thing is not very much different from a sentient being. How can spirit be burned up? How can something inconceivable be burned up? How can the suchness be burned up? How can the I don't know how you call it. How can nomina, borrowing the term from Kant, we have phenomena, we have nomina, right? Borrowing from, it's easy to borrow current philosophers to explain something. Kant, a modern day philosopher, said that if he can classify everything, he would classify everything into two ways. One is phenomena, which is form, which you can see, you can touch. The other is noumena, which you cannot see, you cannot touch. That is something like eternity. That is spirituality. How can spirituality be burned up? If it can be burned up, it's a thing. It's limited in its power. So when a body is cremated, you cremated something that is transitory. How can something permanent be burned up? How can eternity be burned up? If I can compare eternity to space, how can space be burned up? Can you burn up space? I can burn up this. I can burn up this remote control because it's a thing. Only something that is limited in power, in strength, can be burned up. How can the space be burned up? Can you burn up space? No. For that reason, what's the problem of burning up something, a physical body? This physical body is going to go. It does not matter whether you want to burn it up or not. It does not matter whether your body, you cremate your body or not, it's going to disintegrate. It's going to disappear. But there is an eternity in your body that cannot be burned up. And some people call that the consciousness, a liar consciousness. That is something in each one of us, that holiness, the sanctity, that real nature, that bodhi, that can never be burned up. And it is because of that bodhi that we attain the enlightenment. So the body can be burned up. It does not matter because that body is dead. But you really have to watch out for something. Make a qualifications to what I said. When a person passes away, his consciousness, that spirituality may still stay in the body for 7 days. For 7 days, some people said for 8 days. So when a person dies, make sure that within the 8 days, you don't burn up his body, because his spirituality, this alaya consciousness, may still remain in the body. In other words, this body is dead. My first thing to go, my breath goes, and there's no more breath in me. And then my eyesight goes too. And my hearing goes later. So when a person passes away, within 1 or 2 hours, he may still be able to listen to you. He may understand what you're talking about. If you're crying, he still understands. He still can hear you crying. If you're crying too much, you may affect the dead body. You may affect that person, and he may still attach to the family, attach to the emotions, and he can't be reborn in the Pure Land. So you make sure that you don't cremate a body within 7 days, the next 7 days, because if his consciousness is still there, he may feel a lot of pain. So all those, you have to read about them, we have to talk about them when we talk about the bardo stage of a dead person. So that I'm not going to deal too much, because that takes time. So I don't see any reason why a physical do not allow the dead to be cremated. We're sure it can be cremated, but after the 8th day, then you can cremate it. It does not affect the spirituality. It does not affect the alaya consciousness, because after the 8th day, the alaya consciousness will leave the body. That's the last to leave the body. The alaya consciousness is first to enter the body and the last to leave the body. What do I mean by that? When a man and a woman comes into contact and carry out certain action, a baby, an idea, and then a flicker of the light comes up, and then that bardo stage, body, sentient being, enters the body. seeing the light. That alive consciousness enters the body before the embryo was formed. And that's the first to enter the mother's body, and the last to leave the dead body. Now that you really have to know. All these we deal with in the Bado Sutra. If you want to know more about that, read the Tibetan book of the dead. It explains a lot about death. So you should explore into that book. It gives a lot of details of what the Buddha said about death and the Bado stage of death. Okay, that answers that question. I can go on because we still have a 1:30 session later. Third question, I like to volunteer as a tour guide next summer. Does the temple have a training program for guides? Yeah, we have a lot of tours in the summer, many tours. Senior homes, universities, high schools, many organizations come to the temple to tour the temple. More and more, we're increasing the number of tours. Requests increase every month. And right now, Tom and Apoy, these two people, are doing tour guides, and they have been very busy that they don't have time. They haven't got enough time to write up a tour guide book. So if you would volunteer to be a tour guide next summer, why don't you volunteer to write up a tour guide manual first? Well, why don't you start a list? Anybody who's interested in being a tour guide, help them because they're too busy. We're short of staff in here. We're very busy. Then if you have any volunteer, the person who wrote this question, maybe you pass the paper around who would like to be a tour guide and help in the formation of a tour guide menu, because you really have to know the temple first. And if you attempt to do a tour guide menu, then I'll arrange a meeting of you and all those who are interested to meet Tom and Apoy, and then so that you form a tour guide menu for the temple. And then there's a lot of merit in forming the tour guide menu, because if the tour guide menu is structured in such a way that it's informative, it's interesting, you're contributing to every tour. The merits arise from people who tour the place and get enlightened to be a better person, to achieve better meaning in life. You get the merit because you help to form that tour guide manual. Something that we are striving for, something that we've been talking about for years, but only talk, no action. And how many people can volunteer to do that? It's very interesting you volunteer to be a tour guide because you like to help, you like to give information. And being a tour guide would give you a lot of training, because once you talk more and more, you know how to give information. You know how to structure your talk. As I said, by helping others, you're actually helping yourself. Sometimes when I'm lecturing, I don't know if I'm lecturing to myself or to other people. Every time after I finish the lecture, I said, I learn a lot. Not by wanting people to know what I lecture. I educate myself. One would educate more on oneself by giving lecture to educating others. Of course, your objective is to render compassion, to help others. You see, there's a lot of meaning in life. It depends on your attitude. If you have a negative attitude, nothing works out. You see, I'm poor, I don't have a job, I have a divorce, and my kids are not behaving well. You put up all these negative things in front of you. Why don't you be more positive? A negative attitude would drive you to depression, would drive you to a bad mood. A Buddhist is absolutely positive, absolutely active. He wouldn't sit there and wait for death to come. He would be actively establishing a positive attitude in life. You have a choice to lead your own life. What is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is not fixed. you are the director of that film called self, life. You are the director of this documentary film. You become a saint later. Of this film that you also play the role of the actor or the actress. You are the actor. You write your own script. You are also the director. Who writes the life of your script? I write the script of our life. You yourself write out the script of your own life. What kind of script you want? A negative script? A positive script? I wouldn't write a negative script. I would write a positive, compassionate, helpful, meaningful script. That script will win the Academy Award. Usually, a good script will win the Academy Award. A bad script, you can't even get into the picture. So, what kind of script you want to write? You write out that. I can't write it for you. Not only writing it out, you played it out. You're the director. And being a director, you know your own mistakes. You know your own weaknesses. You know your own strength. And you try to strengthen it. That's the meaning of life.